There's this guy on Twitter. His name is Noah Smith. It's at No Opinion. He's just kind of one of these, normal like lib accounts. But every now and then he posts something that's mildly thought-provoking. This is kind of interesting to me. This is the tweet. The cool thing about Cyberpunk coming true is that we all got the Cyberpunk futures. China, universal surveillance and social control. America, cool gadgets and staggering inequality. Russia, shadowy plots, covert ops, and assassins. Japan. I thought that was pretty good because we always talk about like, what is the future going to be like? And then somebody in the room always says, well, we live in the future, and then like lists off some various reasons. But there are these kind of like, in cinema, there are all these various iterations of what the cyberpunk future is like. Right. And to think about how they all do kind of, in a sense, exist is kind of hilarious to me. Because when we say like, oh, we live in the future already, we don't necessarily then divvy it out between the countries, how they all have different futures that they're kind of like living in. And you right now live in the Bay Area, which is its own microcosm of a future that I used to live in the Bay Area, and you do kind of like feel like, oh, I'm in part of like some cyberpunk sort of future. What are your thoughts on that? Like, does that resonate with you at all?
A fucking liberal cyberpunk dystopia.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Where it's like the actual opposite of cyberpunk, where everybody's like super apologetic and like there's no cool like Blade Runner-esque clothing. Everybody's just wearing like vaguely modernized Patagonia shit.
Yeah.
There's no neon. There's no cool sex. There's nothing. It's just a sexless dystopian liberal fucking cyberpunk future here.
I mean, that actually does describe it pretty well, although it's interesting to me a couple of years ago when I last went to New York City, and then you fly back to SFO, and then you're on BART, and the juxtaposition between the coldness and the grayness and the blandness of the New York City people to just the ultra chill vibes of the people in San Francisco. You don't quite realize how chill people are in the Bay Area until you've been in like on the East Coast.
All
and then
of
you
Cali.
land here and it's like, whoa, people are so chill here. Like, it's nuts. It's like something in the water in a sense. But
everybody's
yeah,
sort of like, it's paradise, man. If people hate us because it's paradise. I mean, you live in Sac, which has 4 seasons, but they're exceptionally mild 4 seasons. Like here in Berkeley, it's basically Southern California. It's like 75 most of the year. Like Southern California is just nice and warm all the time. I guess if you live inland in some like shitty suburb, like why would you? But if you do, then you might as well live anywhere because it's hot and like kind of crappy, but and not like particularly culturally rich. But yeah, the the inequality of the future as it's spread across. I think we talked about this last podcast, but it's like it's a pretty wild disparity where like maybe in feudal times everybody was living in some like type of fiefdom or something like that, and like like the quality of life was vaguely similar for like royals and peasants, and like not in relation to each other but just globally, like the rich were balling, the poor were farming. And like now it's crazy because you still have like feudalist societies like 600 years later, and then you have like these ultra futuristic places like Japan and kind of some places in the United States, I'm sure some places in Europe. The future has an unequal distribution through space. I've always kind of find that funny. I mean, we look at like I don't want to try to, I'm not gonna say, this is not a segue. But it is pretty crazy watching people fight with sticks and stones in the Middle East right now, man.
Right.
And Ukraine, Russia, where it's like Ukraine, Russia, like they're in like a 40s kind of situation. Like you like Palestine, Israel, kind of in like a 1580s type situation. Like us here in the United States, definitely just straight up living in 2023, with the exception of like dental technology and just weird recalcitrant industries that refuse to modernize, probably because there's a financial incentive.
Right. Yeah, a couple things there that I think are just so fascinating. Like, one is just how language can just color your view of reality. And the second you say we're living in a cyberpunk world and it's different from this other cyberpunk world, and you start to talk about that, it kind of changes the whole perspective on what your day-to-day life kind of is, because everything that is cyberpunk about our existence, we totally just take it for granted, and it seems so just like normal and bland. But if you do kind of like step back a little bit and then start to talk about people, like you said, as you phrase it, fighting with sticks and stones over like a blood and soil conflict sort of thing, which is so, one, like anti-American, and like to be like blood and soil about anything. And then two, it just seems so kind of retrograde. It seems really, guys, like, come on, just like, I don't know, exchange some money
over
or
territory. You know what I mean? Like,
come on, territory. Yeah.
Please. I know in the United States we have such an insane luxury of being basically an island nation that subjugated all of our neighbors. And so like or destabilized all of our neighbors like pretty intentionally. And there is like a deep hypocrisy in like looking over at the other side of the world and being like, what, it was funny because Karen, my partner, was just watching a video on Taiwan yesterday, and it's such an interesting proxy like metaphor almost for the Ukraine situation, where it's like Taiwan, we once had 20,000 U.S. troops in Taiwan, I think in like the 50s or the 60s.
Whoa.
That's like 10 miles off the Chinese fucking coastline. Like, and then we're like with Ukraine and Russia, we're like, well, what do you mean? Like NATO is like a peacekeeping organization. Like, why would you be upset with them being right next door? And I'm like, oh yeah, like it is kind of an issue when like threat territories are close to your borders, and we just don't have. That would be like if like China had like a base in Cuba. Like we would never let that happen. We're so ruthless.
Oh, we would not let that happen. Yes.
We're so ruthless. We were like, we saw Central America coming of age in like the 60s and the 70s, and we were like, no. Like we're gonna send people to topple your governments because we can't be having you guys getting too economically independent.
But I also like the element here that we think that life is so stable in America, but we are just always just living on the razor's edge. I read this article yesterday about, I think it was like the article was kind of broadly about how civilization works, how anything gets made. And it was like right now in the modern luxury of America, it's all about infrastructure. We never think about it, but it's the infrastructure that makes us live our day-to-day lives, whether it's the internet, clean water. I just saw a map the other day of all the countries in the world that you can drink the tap water. It's like 5 countries, dude. It's like not like you can't in China. Like a lot of the countries that you would think you could, you can't, which I had no idea about. It's like 5 or 6 countries where you can drink the water. And so it's like water and like roads, and so there's this infrastructure, but the second like the power grid goes out, or like any form of infrastructure goes down, it is dystopia. Like automatically that second dystopia hits.
Maybe though, because if you think about one of the things about America is such a powerful country, not only as like a geopolitical like place, but like as an idea, because it's so heavily individualistic that it's like people have been preparing for their own personal apocalypses for like 100 years.
Yeah.
And like, dude, like you've got like, I bet you it's something crazy, like especially after the pandemic, like 10-20% of people probably have like a good store of food, a good store of water, guns, ammo, like everything that you would need except for maybe like a fallout shelter to survive the apocalypse. And then the rest of the people, maybe the laggard mass of maybe 50% of people that are just kind of plugged in, like they're not going to know what to do. They're not like they're not physically activated enough to go like riot and shit. You know what I mean? They're just going to be like freaked out in their house, like trying to figure out what's next. Meanwhile, there's going to be like 5 million Joe Rogans just like fucking hiding in their storm cellar eating like elk jerky for like 10 years until it all peters out. Can you imagine if like another country invaded us here? It would be such like a Vietnam redux, where it's just like Ponzu traps and fucking like just like random guys named Jeff like hiding in bushes with full 50 caliber machine guns and shit.
Okay, well, a couple of like two comments here that come to mind. The first is I think you're totally right. America is so goofy with how we're like so ready for the apocalypse, and like we're just like juiced on that idea. But you know, a couple years ago when that whole like weather storm in Texas knocked out their power grid, like
True.
people, like a lot of people died and were like crazy uncomfortable, and nothing is sexy or fun about that. I mean, it's just like
True.
that was dystopia in the worst possible sense, like death
True.
for like quite a number of people. So there is like kind of that reality too. I'm sure some people in Texas were like, yeah, this is my chance to like be a man or whatever.
Break out the elk jerky, babe.
But okay, my other comment here is that you said if we were ever invaded, we would just get our guns and it'd just be like this like crazy like cinematic experience with America. It's like, yeah, I worry about that because I really worry that right now we are so susceptible to terrorism vis-a-vis propaganda. And especially a lot of the people who have the guns, they might be the ones that would be most influenced by a strongman figure doing the propaganda war with them as their target. And then all of a sudden, those people that you would think be fighting for like the great US of A are turning against the government and like, you know what I mean? Like riding against police stations and killing the whoever, you know what I mean? Like I could see that as well. And that I don't know. That's like what makes me nervous about this moment in history, seeing the whole riots at the Capitol, the January 6th thing. And I don't know, people can be like kind of propagated to become the bad guys in a sense in their own movie, you know, and that's worrisome.
It is. I mean, it is like, God, I'm always really loath to draw this comparison, but I do think maybe in the moment it bears it. But there is a bit of a Germany Hitler kind of like pre World War II potential energy that I feel, where I think there's a lot of people that are very reasonable but would maybe do something that they would at some point in the future deeply regret because they're so emotionally activated by like a concept or a person or a straw man. You know, I mean, if Trump can present a sufficient straw man for people that everybody can get on board, which would be a bit of a work of creative genius, if I'm being honest. Like Trump does have a bit of a particular style of genius that I think is possible that he could get a lot of people riled up and angry at their neighbors for really no good reason. I think right now a lot of that hinges on cultural happenings where it's like we were in the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, that all happened during Trump's presidency. And so there's just like a lot of tinder, you know, like a lot of fire starting material. I think like we're starting to come to a point culturally where things are maybe a little bit less polarized and we're starting to realize that like, oh, the extreme right and the extreme left are dragging us pretty far afield of like normal people discourse. But maybe that's just me, but I do see people kind of chilling out a little bit. Like I don't feel the same like insane vitriol or like even as Trump's presidency looms upon us again, I think it seems like people aren't so like aroused by it. You know, like there was like almost this like sexual energy to the first Trump presidency where people were just like they just had bloodlust. They were just like, this fucking black guy has been telling me what to do for 8 years. You know, like I need something different. Or even just this liberal guy, you know, this well-spoken guy has been talking at me for 8 years. I need somebody to just tell me like what daddy would say, you know. And people were very like, it was very sensual, you know, how people were like, oh, Daddy Trump, like all of these fucking like crazy paintings of him with like, he's all ripped and he's like riding a horse. And I'm like, whoa, dude, like there's some Freudian things happening in the zeitgeist right now, man.
Do you remember the guy Milo Yiannopoulos by any chance?
Sure. Oh, wow. I haven't heard his name for a while.
Daddy. His whole thing was calling Trump daddy. And it was Honestly, it was pretty funny because it was so over the top. It's exactly what you're saying.
I think you're right though. Long and short, I think it is possible to get enough of the populace kind of riled up into a civil war type anger or resentment. But I think there would have to be some kind of pivotal cultural moment that you'd be able to. There'd have to be some kind of like the Jews. You know what I mean? Like person to blame or like cultural phenomena to blame. Like nobody's having a civil war over like trans story time or fucking like dead naming or like any of the other stuff that like the GOP wants to be like. It's like, yeah, you guys kind of squeezed all the blood from the stone on that, guys. You're gonna have to figure out like a different hobby horse. You know?
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to pivot to one more topic here. Do you know this guy FM 2030?
No.
So he's a futurist, like an actual futurist. That's like, name on the placard on his desk, sort of thing. And his real name is FM Esfandiari. He was an Iranian guy, super crazy guy, like worth just like skimming his Wikipedia. It's fascinating, everything about this guy. But he has a couple of books that are online for free as PDFs. And they're just like, his style is so wacky and so just like zany and over the top and zippy and fun to read that like, even if you're not interested in futurism at all, like he's a fun person to read just as a stylist, I would say. It's not like good writing necessarily, but it's just fun. And I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. But I think a lot about this book of his called Upwingers. And I feel like a lot of people are influenced by it, even if they don't know that they are. Like I always think about like Andrew Yang, how he has the Forward Party. It is like the Upwinger Party. That's what that is. Upwingers is about a political movement about we're not going left or right, we're going up, right? Which is like Andrew Yang, we're not going left or right, we're going forward. So there's this kind of perspective.
Changing the dimension we're changing the axis of travel, dude.
Yeah, well, this is like a real thing that I really love of a lot of people who I like, even if I don't agree with them at all, they do this thing where they will say like, take yourself out of the matrix, right? And the second you do that, like even like Richard Dawkins talks about this, like take yourself out of the moral matrix and like stand up above it and kind of like analyze it, right? I really like that. And FM does this for technology. And so he ends up throwing out all these just like wackadoo ideas. And one I'm actually writing about right now. I'm going to publish a piece on my Substack probably in a couple of days. But it's effectively just reprinting one of the chapters from his book because I think about it all the time and I don't agree with it at all. But I would like love to talk about this with you to get your thoughts and maybe spew some of my thoughts on it.
Dude, but, flyby for the tower has been approved.
Excellent. So this chapter is called Beyond Cities. And it is about how he makes this case. Cities are basically just museums, especially like our best cities. They're just museums. And as he puts it, we've been brainwashed by old world values and aesthetics to still find value in these things and to try to like restore them. He says it's a lost cause. Just they are museums. Let's treat them as museums and let's no longer live there. Let's build new communities. And he calls them instant communities. And this is what he says that we need to move to. So one, I love cities. I think cities are like the greatest human work of art we've ever created. So I'm not into like the abandon them game, but there are certain parts of famous cities, I'll just pick on San Francisco, where it is so culturally ossified. If you go to North Beach or the Haight, and I love those places and I actually spend time there and I totally am all about it, you can tell nobody's coming out of here as a great writer anymore or a great musician. It's just not happening. Like, sorry, but like this place is full of tourists and there are like hippies who are like now just like LARPing as hippies in the Haight, for example. And sure, like a lot of culture comes out of San Francisco, but it's not like art and music and movies like it used to be. It's a different thing. Like, and it's a museum that is now like fetishized by artists rather than like being an actual inspiration by them. So there's something there, but like, maybe I'll just right there. I'll pass it to you to get your thoughts on like the museum element of cities and how that rubs you, because that's a point that he makes that like I feel that for sure.
Yeah, how could you not? I mean, living in the Bay Area and going to San Francisco really all the time. It's like it's something that I bemoan constantly, is that it isn't really like it is not a art factory anymore. Like it is truly like an art museum. However, as the future becomes more compartmentalized and we all splinter off into our kind of mimetic groups, uh, something like the hippie movement, and something that was so kind of like pan-cultural and so had such broad sweeping appeal. I think those are things like AC/DC, where we're gonna kind of cling to the last moment where a single cultural idea could sweep through most people and polarize them either towards or against it. Like we're never gonna live in that time again. Or maybe, I mean, I don't know, who knows? Maybe we haven't found like the super memes yet, like the hippie movement, kind of low hanging fruit, right? It's like 10 ideas that people were like, oh yeah, shit, fuck all the time, eat good, I mean, like, and I completely agree. I think that there is no place in San Francisco that is truly like a Warhol-esque, factory of art production, but there is, not unlike, no, I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of splinter cells of artists all throughout the city that are doing their own thing. Like I went to a super cool underground show at a warehouse the other night. That was awesome. But it was like, what, 50 people there, 100 people there, 150 people there. There's no more big cultural movements, and I think having a museum to those things for a little while is fine, but they'll eventually peter out. Like Hate Street will eventually just become another avenue of shops like anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, one thing that is fascinating about San Francisco, given it this analysis, is that it still is the hub of a major cultural force, which is like the startup business. True. And now like AI is basically birthed in San Francisco.
Yeah.
The mission is where OpenAI has their headquarters, I believe.
Right.
Crazy, right? And like, I
unfortunate, some would argue.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely, and I think that there's a little bit of an argument that people who are coders or programmers or dreamers in this sense, who are trying to like be the next Steve Jobs, that's kind of like an artist role as well. It's creating, not just consuming. There is this like difference between like people who are consumers versus people who are creators. Probably people in the Midwest are more the consumer type rather than the creator type. So True. I'll give them that credit. But yeah, you also kind of like do have to wonder, why are these tech developers, why are they in San Francisco and not Silicon Valley? Aren't they just kind of trying to like leech off the beautiful culture that others created? And like they're just like, they don't belong there, but they're just like, we're in San Francisco, we're cool.
I'm suddenly seething with rage at the accuracy of that indictment.
It's like, go back to Silicon Valley, but like Silicon Valley doesn't build houses, so no one lives there.
It makes me so angry, like tech culture, because the dominant culture in San Francisco has always been kind of like pithy rich people, and like whatever. But they used to be weird pithy rich people that had like a fetish for supporting weird art. And that in the queer community in San Francisco, that still does exist, and there are a lot of wealthy queer folks in San Francisco that still patronize like sick, albeit predominantly queer art, which it needs that. It needs its whole section of patronage and its whole kind of section of culture. But then it's like it's a pretty narrow strip of artists that exist in a place. And tech people, yeah, man, it just makes me sad, because it's like you can afford to be cool. You have enough money that if you had even the slightest idea of something that was cool or novel or interesting, boy, you could put together something really, really cool. But weirdly enough, they are also the consumer class, because the creativity involved in so much tech stuff is formulaic. And it is creative to an extent, but it's not kind of like free time rubato, like creation. It's really pretty structured and pretty, and they themselves are little consumer sluts too. They just want to buy cool shit with the money that they make. They don't necessarily want that stuff to be bespoke unless it's very slick looking. So it's like, yeah, it fucking drives me nuts.
Well, let me get back to FM 2030 here. So he does this rant against cities, which again, like I do sort of buy, even though I love cities. I could.
They're never gonna go away.
They're not gonna go away.
People love living this close to one another. People like me.
Yeah. Like there's a reason cities are expensive. It's because people want to live there. Like you when you build a beautiful city, it becomes a playground for adults, like effectively. Yeah. It's anyway. I could rant about that, but I'll save it. But FM thinks that we're going to pivot away from cities and towards these instant communities things. And this is something that he does describe at some length, although it's all kind of like cartoonish. But it's like all these people will congregate around an area for a specific purpose, and then they'll disperse. And then they'll do that again and again, like all over. And one thing that's interesting to me about this is like, well, I mean, first thought that comes to mind is never going to happen. And I realize that like hard after having a child, because as soon as you have like a child and stuff, a lot of that appeal is kind of like gone. So there's that. But also like this is actually in a certain way kind of happening. How the digital nomad phenomenon is effectively this, but it's not just like groups. It's just individuals doing their kind of like wherever they lay their head is their home for the night, sort of thing, and making money like virtually. Yeah. So there's that. Then there's also just the Airbnb world in general that facilitates this, where everyone can kind of participate and being a local in any community in the world at some level, or at least that's the vision. And then the third element here that I would note is that there also are these startup communities by like the Seasteading Institute, where they're building these little one-off communities out in the ocean or like off islands. And that's another kind of component here that you could kind of tie it back to FM 2030 and be like, that was the seed of this thing that's happening. And I will say, my last note here, there is something so amazing about getting the hell out of town, about not feeling trapped. And I think that that's something that, I mean, it definitely is like a privileged experience to be able to be ultra mobile. Like, name a rich person who never travels. Like, the second you become
almost don't exist.
Yeah, you start traveling. That's just like part of the game. And because there's like freedom in that, and there's like your spirit is enlivened by seeing the world. And so there's so much that's good about traveling, I think. But like, interestingly, all those rich people, they're going to big cities probably for the most part to experience the culture of those cities. But in any case, what are your thoughts on like instant communities and maybe them as a future for us?
I don't know about instant communities. I mean, I think in a weird way that already exists around kind of like specialized stuff now, like oil field workers and like, I mean, we have that, but it's just kind of trade related rather than like culturally related. And maybe if we live in some kind of post-apocalyptic scenario, it's resource related where we congregate around resources and stuff, but we've really become masters of reallocating resource. I don't really see that happening. I could see something similar to kind of the kibbutzim, I could see like a model where, because in Israel, something that's really intelligent that they've done is that they've created a lot of self-sufficient communities. And like a kibbutz is a place where it's 100% hermetically sealed. Culturally, economically, food-wise, everything is there. Everything that they need to survive is there, or they can trade with the kibbutz close to them for it. But generally, everything is there provided, and everybody's has some kind of sharing economy idea around it. I could see that happening in the United States, or in other places in the world where we've got this kind of mimetic idea that we have a holding capacity of about 160 relations that we can hold with any degree of like tightness. And I think probably eventually, as we come into a more kind of science-based religion, or as like the religion of science becomes the predominant religion on earth, there's going to be a lot of stuff like data-backed stuff. Like they're buying up all that land here between you and me in the Yola Valley, or in the Yuba Valley, Yolo Valley, and they want to do like a utopian city. And it's like, I think a lot of stuff like that's going to happen, where it's going to be data backed, like city building and infrastructure, architecture, cultural architecture, stuff like that will probably happen more. But that one seems a little weird to me. Just the idea, like, I love the idea of humans as nomads, but like you said, there's just like this, I see it in myself as I get older. Everybody that gets older, I think, sees it in themselves, that there's a heightening desire to be more and more secure somehow. Like to at least guarantee that the next X amount of months or years for you are not going to be frightening economically or space wise. I'm a person that was unhoused, that was homeless at different points in my life. And so like, I know what it feels like to be a nomadic person. It's not dope. It's truly not a cool experience at all, especially if you have a kid. So, nah, probably not. But I do see like a lot of like weird futuristic community ideas happening as we kind of realize that there are some serious problems with living in cities, and that, conversely, there's some really serious problems with living in the suburbs. And there's really not that many problems with living in like a hyper rural environment, other than it being an echo chamber of ideas. I mean, really, like, going to Montana and being in a small town of 1,000, it actually is kind of idyllic. Like they really don't struggle with a lot of like writ large issues in a place like that.
Yeah, you miss out on a lot of like actual culture though too.
Yeah, but most people don't care.
Most people don't care.
Most people don't care. Most people aren't artists or don't have like the artistic impulse other than like doing something maybe crafty around the house. But like there's so many people that are just on like, I would call it level 1, but that makes it seem like it's stratified. It's really not. They're just on a path that's way more simple, and it's like a simpler path to validation that I think I want for more people. I think one of the problems that we have in modern society is that we're all being forced to, it's being propagandized to us that we all need to be hyper individualistic creators and entrepreneurs. And personally, that's always been something that I wanted for myself, and so it's great for me. But like people in the middle of the country, man, like there's got to be more relaxed acceptance of people that want to live kind of like a 1 or a 2 speed life, and like actually supporting those people to do that, because they are the ballast that allows culture to continue kind of trudging forward. You don't want to release that ballast. You actually don't want everybody to have like crazy big dreams and ideas about everything and blah, blah, blah. You want a lot of people to just be living like a pretty chill, pretty normal life with like kind of, ideas that maybe aren't hyper nuanced. And like those people are super, super, super important in the kind of writ large functioning of a country that is so obsessed with progress and so psychotically driven to innovate. You just need people that are going to consume that and be chill.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, one thing that I want to say, just as maybe a last note about the instant communities thing, is we are also, everything is fluid, right? Like technology hasn't stopped progressing, and there might become a time, 2030 was the year that FM 2030 had in his mind where things get really crazy. But like there could be a time where things do actually get really crazy, where all of a sudden life expectancy is extended 100 years. And then maybe we all do tap into this, as people talk about the abundance phenomenon, where all of a sudden there is just an abundance of resources, and humans no longer have to work more than 10 hours a week.
We're so close to that. We're so close to that. We're so close to a technological innovation changing life for it. Like, we just need energy independence, and then everything changes.
Everything changes.
Everything changes.
And assuming it's not all the wealth isn't just lopped off from like the top 5% of the population, assuming it does kind of like trickle down to everybody, which hopefully it will.
Hopefully, yeah.
Man, like life itself, think about how much life has changed in the last couple hundred years. just like project this out a couple hundred years. Things are going to be so, assuming we don't blow ourselves up, life is going to be equally as radically transformed 200 years from today as it was 200 years ago in the past when you had like your horse and buggy, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe someone 200 years from now reading FM 2030 will be like, oh, this is so quaint. Oh, instant communities, that happened 100 years ago, and now we're so far beyond that. And this was a radical idea back in the day. It's just kind of interesting to think about that, like the long term. FM 2030 was writing like in the 70s, 80s.
Oh,
I think,
interesting.
like that. So it wasn't that long ago, and he did predict a lot of things that are pretty damn normal now.
I love that like all of that cohort of science fiction writers like Frank Herbert and like Ursula K. Le Guin, like all of these people like envisioned this like hyper developed, super surrealist, super Blade Runner type future where like humans are still fighting feudal fucking wars. Like, dude, like the central conceit of Dune is like Japanese feudalism,
Well, the thing that really bugs me about like Marvel movies, and this is true I think this is a failing of artists and writers. You know how like in Marvel movies, they have all these like superheroes with these crazy powers. They end up in fistfights in like every scene. It's like, why are you two dueling it out with your fists? This makes absolutely no sense. But it's cinematic and, that's the thing. But it's so stupid. Like, if you think about it for like half a second, why are these people punching each other in midair or whatever? It's so stupid.
I mean, we're already there. It's funny because like the analog in real life is that there's like troops on the ground fighting wars in places where there's like plenty of robots. Like we got tons of robots, dude. Like, why are we doing this? Like
that was our last episode. Yeah.
I know.
Hey man, well I got to wrap it up. I got to get back to work. Speaking of working too much, and we're not in the future quite yet. But yeah, that was a good one. That was fun.